Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our nonprofit planning using data, the American Community Survey, and the U.S. Census. I really appreciate you joining us today. Presenters today, I'm with Dr. Andrew Beveridge. He's the co-founder and president of Social Explorer, and he is also emeritus professor of sociology at Queens College and the Graduate School and University Center of the City University in New York. Since 1993, Dr. Beveridge has been a consultant to the New York Times, which has published numerous news reports and maps based on his analysis of the census data. I'm also pleased to be with Frank Bass, a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter whose career is focused on the intersection of government, politics, business. He's a pioneer in data-driven investigations with almost 3 decades of multimedia experience and innovation at top journalism organizations. He's worked for the Wall Street Journal, Associated Press, Bloomberg News, Al Jazeera International. And I'm also with you today. I have over 30 years experience developing content for higher ed and also for nonprofit organizations. I'm the director of content development for Social Explorer. So thank you all for joining today. There's a large group. There's going to be 50 plus of us here today. So I ask that if you have any questions, please use the chat function and send me your questions via chat. So goals for our meeting. I want to do an overview of key partnerships and case studies in the nonprofit space, and Dr. Beveridge is going to walk us through that. We're going to discuss the American Community Survey and the data sets found within the American Community Survey, and Frank will work on that. And then I'll give a quick overview of how Social Explorer works. And then if there's time, we'll take some questions, but it may be too large a group. I can always take questions from you afterwards by email, or we can meet by phone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's going to present some case studies for you, give you some ideas of the types of things that you can do using the American Community Survey data and the census data. And so, Andy, it's all yours.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. I should mention, I think, before we get started, that I've actually had a lot of experience working with nonprofits in a variety of ways, and I've done some projects for nonprofits, generally speaking, having to do with service to clients, service to their clients, and/or service of clients plus efforts to figure out like what would be attractive for donors. So beyond the media stuff and the being an academic, I've worked a lot with nonprofits. Also in another area, I've done a lot of litigation consulting, which has been sponsored by nonprofits. So go to the next slide, Jeff. So today what I want to do is I want to show 3 quick examples of how nonprofits have used the American Community Survey data, which is the basic data that people would use for this. Nonprofits, as probably many of you know, often get some of their funding from government agencies, or they get funding from donors, and they provide certain services. And so the American Community Survey makes it very easy or very possible to analyze both ends of the spectrum, to analyze clients' service needs, and all of those sorts of things. So Social Explorer makes this possible, and it's also possible to add information from the nonprofit and combine the two. And we have one example of that today as well. So I'm going to try to go through 3 quick examples. The first is the United Way of Greenwich, Connecticut, which wanted to do assessment of where their services would be best, what type of services should they have and where they should be. And then I'm going to show an example from a group of advocacy organizations in Georgia choose Social Explorer, and I think a very effective way, and then in a way that clearly had an impact. And then finally, I'll show a quick example, a little bit more depth actually, from the Ypsilanti Public Library, which used Social Explorer plus data on their patrons to do an analysis of who they were serving, where they were serving, and so forth. So go to the next slide, Jeff. So Greenwich the analysis looked at the town over time and looked at various neighborhoods at a specific time. And because of the ACS and the data that's in the ACS and the fact that it's down to a fairly small area called the block group, which is kind of like a neighborhood, you can look at income, racial composition, household composition, poverty, availability of health insurance, a variety, disability, whether or not you're disabled, which type of disability you have, the disability distribution by age. All of those sorts of things can be looked at by neighborhood and by community. And in the slides I'm going to show from Greenwich, and this is just the tip of the iceberg really, looks at income, looks at how Greenwich has changed over a long period of time, and so forth. Go to the next, Jeff. So this shows Greenwich, and it shows how it's mapped. And Social Explorer, you can create maps of any community really using Social Explorer, and that's what they did in Greenwich. And they used they use block groups, blocks, which we've got up now. We have the 2020 blocks up, but most of the data is really from the American Community Survey. The census has just a few variables, and they do, I mean, the one difference is that they do go down to the block level. So this just shows you Greenwich, and they took their neighborhoods in Greenwich and they resolved them into census boundaries, and then they could say things about, you know, how is Coscob different from other parts of Greenwich. Go on to the next, Jeff. So this is sort of one of their basic slides. They wanted to look at how Greenwich has changed in diversity. Now, if you don't know Greenwich, I mean, Greenwich is a very high-end suburb of New York City. Recently has become a place where hedge fund people go and live, but nonetheless, it has developed a certain amount of diversity. And you can see this, the Hispanic population has grown, the African-American population has grown slightly, and the Asian population has also grown. So Greenwich is participating in the typical diversity that's going on in the United States, and would probably be even more so after the 2020 census. Next. And they also wanted to compare Greenwich to its neighboring rich suburbs, or what they call their peers. And this includes New Canaan and Darien, and you can see Greenwich is more diverse than New Canaan and Darien. You can see this in a second. You could do the same kind of slide by neighborhood group and by many other characteristics. So go to the next one, Jeff. Yeah, this was one that they focused on. The red bar is whether or not you have public insurance. So, and the character, I mean, I didn't build this chart. So, and so then whether you have any insurance, public insurance, or private insurance, they didn't put private insurance in as a bar, which I might have done. But basically, the red is public insurance, and blue is no coverage. And the thing about this is, if you take Darien, which is one of the richest towns in the neighborhood, only 1% of the people have no coverage whatever, and only 15% are in public, which I guess would be something, probably be either Medicaid or the Affordable Care Act insurance, Obamacare. Go on to the next. So that's the kind of thing. So they went and did a comprehensive study of Greenwich, and they use it to target neighborhoods and a variety of things. So then another possible use, one we're kind of proud of at Social Explorer actually, was the use in the by the group of nonprofits, some of which would not be 501c3. A couple of these will probably be 501c4, to force or convince the Georgia to make sure that enough voting sites were open in the senatorial runoff. They had initially planned to close most of the early voting sites and many of the early, and particularly the ones in minority neighborhoods. And this, you might as well go to the next, Jeff. So this coalition of nonprofits, which includes LDF, which is the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they're a 501c3. NAACP is not. I believe the ACLU and SPLC Action are, well, I don't know about SPLC, ACLU is definitely 501c3. I don't know about all voting as local, they probably are. 501c3s could do litigation and they could do sort of general thing. So anyway, they wrote a letter, and the obvious thing here is they were threatening to sue, telling the Cobb County Board of Elections and Registration that they should reopen a lot of the early voting sites. And they ended up reopening a large number of them. And this letter, which is about 10 to 15 pages long, has page after page of Social Explorer maps related to minority groups. I have one example here. Go to the next. So this shows, you can see on this map where the voting sites are, the ones that are planning to close, which are red, and the ones that are open, and the ones that are new. And going through this whole thing, it's clear they are opening new voting sites in non-minority neighborhoods and closing voting sites in minority neighborhoods. And after this letter arrived, they basically reversed course and reopened most of the voting sites that are planned to close. And for those of you who have not watched anything having to do with politics in the last couple of years, this could have definitely helped. I wouldn't say it was necessarily dispositive, but it definitely would have helped Ossoff and Warnock win their senatorial runoff elections, which, as you all know, flipped the Senate to a narrow Democratic majority. So we like this one because you can see impact. And I realize in most nonprofit situations, to have immediate impact is asking an awful lot, or immediate measurable impact. Anyway, go to the next one. So then it's also possible to integrate your own data, depending on what you have, with Social Explorer data and be able to actually get information about your patrons and which clients and which of your clients use the services, and what's the distribution of the clients use the services, and how does that relate to the distribution of various things in the community. And so once again, it's just an extract from this report. But as you'll see in a second, you can use this kind of information to pinpoint who uses your thing here, in this case, the library, and where are they, and to some extent, depending on how much information you have about your clients or your patrons, how does that stack up with the local information? So go to the next, Jeff. All right, so this is just distribution. It's patrons versus population by age and by sex. That's all they really asked. I mean, there's activity, which you'll see in a second, but they didn't ask, and when they registered, and you can figure out how old they were when they originally got a library card. And if you wanted to go crazy, you could find out what the patterns are of taking books out. We didn't go that far. But as you see from this, there's more under 18 population. The group that's 18 to 44, and the group that's not under 18 are more likely to use the library, which is on the left, than the population at large. And secondly, this is sort of an embarrassing finding. If you're male, you can see that the women are much more likely to use the library than the men. Now, that's probably not a surprise, but it's interesting, and it sort of dovetails with the whole notion about women being better educated and so forth and so on. So go to the next slide, Jeff. And so you can do the same thing with race and education level. So without, if you don't have the population, you can still look at the area and see what its demography is. And so that's what we did, what was done here. So we looked at the race of the population and the educational level of the population. Ypsilanti is next to Ann Arbor, and it also has a community college in it. So there's, so there is a large composition of people who have advanced degrees, I think partially because of that. And there's also a large chunk of students, which is something else you get out of the ACS. Go to the next. And then this is some of the activity data. We have age by when they first registered. You have the age distribution of the current patrons. And then you also have who checks out a lot of books. And as you can see from this, if you're older, you're more likely to check out a lot of books. I don't know, I suppose the kids in school age might be ordered to do that. I don't know how that works, but there's a huge gap between 18, 30, and 31 and above. But 18 to 30 would pick up all the college kids. They also may use the Ann Arbor Library or the library in the community college. Go to the next. And then there are 3 branches of the library. So and since we have the address of the clients or patrons, you can see how they stack up in use. And so from this, you can see that there's a high density of use. And from this, you could probably be able to infer that that if you're closer, you're more likely to be a client of a library. I mean, not that that's a big shock, but you could show it, and you could use that to plan kind of where you put your branches, or if you were going to have a bookmobile. Next, please. And so then you could do this kind of work, which would also make it possible to kind of figure out who beyond what we have on the patron are using the library. This is a shaded map of census tracts. This is all the census tracts in the Ypsilanti service area, or Ypsilanti, whatever they call it, that are resident in, and it shows who uses, what the likelihood of using the library is, what the proportion of each of the population in each area is that uses a library. And next step would be to look and see what the the race or Hispanic status, et cetera, of those tracts are. Go to the next slide. I think we're almost done here. This is actually figuring out by sex and by age what proportion we're capturing. It's just by sex. So it's males. So we're getting 30% of the males and 46% of the females. Now that's obviously jives well with what we found before, but it's sort of an interesting thing. That means that actually that the gap between males and females we're seeing is even worse in terms of the actual use. Go ahead to the next. I think I may be done, or there may be one. Oh yeah, this is the same thing by age. So you can figure out the population captured by age. You can see what age of the people are using using services. So it is very, if you have the information on the clients, you can do this kind of analysis. But the base of it is still the American Community Survey, and Frank knows the American Community Survey backward and forward, so he'll tell you about lots of stuff that's in there. And I think some of you might be surprised that it would be that easy to get information on your community that would be as relevant as I think some of it would be for nonprofits. Go ahead, Frank.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So the American Community Survey, first off, I've got to say I've been in the nonprofit sphere for about 6 years now. And before that, I was in the journalism field, which is like the super nonprofit field these days. So
So not
appreciate
purposely, not purposely.
right. Well, it's kind of, yeah, has ambitions. But anyway, so I really appreciate the work everyone does here. The American Community Survey, it's like the Christmas present or the birthday gift that you get that you didn't know you need. It's kind of how I feel about it. It was created as a replacement for the decennial census long form, which used to come out every 10 years. So think about that. And if the long form were still with us in 2009, we would have been using demographic numbers from basically from 1999. So it got old very quickly, literally and figuratively. Another advantage, huge advantage of the American Community Survey, which started around 2005, is that just the sheer size of it all. I mean, we've all seen political polls and surveys that say, you know, a survey of 1,000 registered adults. This is an annual survey of 3.5 million households. So you can get down to a very fine level neighborhood in a lot of instances. It was originally released in 3 releases every year. There was a single year that covered every place with more than 65,000 people, whether it was a state, county, city, school district, anything with more than 65,000 people. There was a 3-year release that basically rolled everything into 3 years, smoothed it out, averaged it for places greater than 20,000. And then there was a 5-year, and still is a 5-year. There's still a 1 year and a 5-year release for that covers basically everything down to something called a block group, which we'll discuss in a minute here. What's it used for? It is almost $1 trillion in annual spending. And one of the, I forgot, one of the other big advantages of the American Community Survey is, since it's an annual survey, Congress can add or take away questions or change categories as needed. For example, 5 years ago, you didn't have questions about internet accessibility or specific country of origin. Some occupations have changed. 10 years ago, I don't believe there was a health insurance question. My guess is 5 years from now, there probably will not be a telephone service question. Disadvantages, just the nature of the survey. The next slide, please. It means that because it's a survey, there are margins of error. So the more fine-grained you get, the more likely you are to run into some sort of variability. You know, you'll get an idea if you say there are, say, 10 Colombians in census tract 77042, and the margin of error is 9. Well, you know, you'll take that with a grain of salt, but that, generally speaking, that's not a problem because you're looking at 5-year roll-ups, or at least my suspicion is that's what you'll be using. There's some strangeness with the population counts, although again, for our purposes, I found them to be fairly reliable. And the 5-year results, sometimes you miss things. For example, the pandemic, the 5-year results, you might get the latest data, but you won't get a real snapshot of it across all geographies. Next slide. So speaking of geographies, this kind of does a pretty good job of explaining what you're looking at. The census block, which is used in the decennial census, it's the atom of the census. You won't get that in the ACS. You will get block groups. Block groups are awfully small. I generally try and use census tracts instead, which are more approximate neighborhoods, 3,000 to 5,000 people generally. Census tracts make up counties, which of course make up states. You may use counties a fair amount. Now you'll note off to either side there's some places and cities. Generally they fit into states. Some do, some or most do. There are some border cities that will be split, that can get kind of kind of weird, but you can see you can also get congressional districts, school districts, very helpful for those of you who are working with children. Zip code tabulation areas. Nobody knows their census tract number, but almost everybody knows their zip. Census does a pretty good job of approximating zip codes, but the strange and ugly secret of the US Postal Service is that zip codes are not a spatial geography, they're a postal delivery route. So you have zip codes that are straight lines or single buildings. The Census Bureau tries to approximate those as best they can. And they, it's about 99%, I'd say, accurate. So next slide, one of the advantages another advantage that I did fail to mention, next slide, is the cross-referencing ability. So I mentioned, for example, you're trying to look at the number of Colombians in a block group. The ACS lets you look at things like Colombians over the age of 25 living in poverty in a block group. So that's something to keep in mind, that there's this huge ability to mash together a lot of different variables, and that can get somewhat ridiculous, but I think for everyone's purposes, it works out pretty well. So talking about those variables, we'll look at the next slide with just the basic characteristics. The ACS, very much like the decennial census, total population, density, gender, age, race, ethnicity, combinations, household relationships, and tenure, which is, do you own or rent? Just one word about race and ethnicity. For census purposes, race is one of 6 basic categories plus a multiracial category and any combination thereof. So you can theoretically be all six races. Ethnicity, meanwhile, is very specific to Hispanic or non-Hispanic. There is not a partial Hispanic, which is something that a lot of people who have one parent who are Hispanics are trying to get changed. Don't know if or when it'll get changed. Next slide, just a quick plug for the kind of things you can have fun with Social Explorer. This map took me about 15 seconds to generate. It's basically a county level density map that shows how empty the middle of the country is in the Great Plains versus the East Coast. And you can zoom in, zoom out, save, email, do all sorts of fun things. The next slide, and now we get to the fun stuff. Ancestry. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. Ever wonder how many people of Irish ancestry are in your zip code or your neighborhood? Nativity, citizenship status, often very useful for nonprofits. Who was born where, and are they citizens? This was, if you'll remember, quite the kerfluffle in the decennial census, but it's a question that's asked and answered every year in the ACS by millions of people. Place of birth, period of naturalization, geographic mobility. How long have you been at your current residence? Did you move from another county? Did you move from another state or another country? Place of work can be somewhat useful. I'm a big fan of these last categories. Transportation. Do you walk, bike, bus, drive, carpool to work? Travel time, time of departure. I kind of have to say the silver lining about this pandemic is my travel time is about 16 seconds from my bed to my desk, with my time of departure being as late as 8:59 and 50 seconds. So it's it'll be very interesting to see how that changes in the next ACS. This is an example. The next slide is an example of what we play with here. These are super commuters, people who take 90 or more minutes at a county level to get to work. Next slide, and these are things that I think will be particularly useful to the nonprofit community: multi-generational households, grandparents living with grandchildren, marital status, single, divorced, married, widowed, school enrollment. Educational attainment goes from basically from elementary or grade school all the way up to PhD programs and professional degrees. Immigration, place of birth, again, very helpful. Language spoken at home. It doesn't break it down into all categories, but it does have quite a few, and it gives you an idea of the real key category there is how well people speak English and whether or not it's their primary language at home. And then for those of you working in the veterans field, you can break down the period of service for veterans. I believe it goes back now to World War II. Not so many left, but it goes from, I believe, World War II all the way through the latest endless wars. Here's what Gulf War 2001 or later. This was a table that was generated very swiftly in Social Explorer. It gives you the number and percentages of veterans within counties by era of service. Next slide, please. Economic characteristics. Again, this is gold for nonprofits. Poverty status, disability status, and type. I think I left out one of the types of disabilities. There's cognitive, hearing, vision, ambulatory, and self-care. Keep in mind, too, this can be combined very easily with different races, ethnicities, and ages. So you could find the number of Black children with vision disabilities very easily. A lot of income statistics. Probably the big one is household income, median household income, because a household can be anywhere from one to infinite number of people. But nice to remember that one person can make up a house. Sources of income, again, it gets pretty deep. You'll get into, you can get SSI, I believe you can get TAMP, direct cash payments. A fair number of things there. The Gini index, the gap between rich and poor. That's all that is. The U.S. is, or well, it works on a scale of 0 to 1. 0 means, I believe, one person has all the money, and 1 means everyone has the same amount of money. No, I'm sorry. 1 is one person has all the money, and 0 is everyone has the same amount. The U.S. is about a 0.55. I think we're on a par basically with Salvador and Botswana. We could do better. Then benefits, good gauge of poverty and need in communities is the percentage of people getting SNAP benefits. And again, that goes down to neighborhood level. Ditto SSI and direct aid. Employment status, that can be useful. It's a little, I won't say it's vague, but the further down you get into the weeds, the fewer categories you have. For example, there are like 550 categories nationwide, but then when you get into a block group or a tract, you're looking at maybe a half dozen, just, private sector, public sector. So that can be useful. Or health insurance. The Census Bureau does put out an annual report on health insurance that's very detailed. But I think the lowest level to go to is a metropolitan statistical area. This gives you health insurance. You can look at health insurance statistics in, for example, school districts. Next slide. Another 15-second effort. I just looked at the Gini index by census tract in Cook County, Illinois. And no great surprise, the biggest gap between rich and poor is along the lakefront. Next slide. Some of you, I'm fairly sure, will look at housing. Vacancy status, very useful. It will also give you the a good idea of whether or not you're looking at a lot of vacation homes or second homes or just simple vacancies. Units in structure, single family house, duplex, triplex, up to, I think, 50 above. Mortgage and rent costs can be very useful because you can also look at mortgage and rent cost as percentage of income, which is probably a better gauge of how expensive an area is than just simply the mortgage cost. Heating fuel type, some of you may be involved in that, everything from utility gas to wood. Plumbing and kitchen facilities, this is a question that really gave a lot of conservative Republicans strokes back in 2010 when they figured out it was being asked. It's asked for very good questions, and all of these questions are authorized by Congress, but there are Safe Water Drinking Acts or a Safe Water Drinking Act. There are a lot of things that play into whether they ask if you've got plumbing or not. Bonus points if you know the states with the least amount of plumbing, Alaska and New Mexico. Alaska, I totally get. New Mexico, I was a little puzzled by. But oh, and yes, by the way, this slide deck will be shared with everyone, so you can slow down the frantic scribbling if that's what you're doing now. Home value, a good number to have, but a little problematic since it's self-reported. It's kind of like when you fill out your taxes on occupation. I'm always philosopher, warrior, statesman, poet. Kind of you are what you say you are, and home value is what you say it is on the ACS. Group quarters, college dorms, nursing homes, prisons. That was especially helpful in the COVID-19 pandemic coverage. And a fairly new one, internet computer access. Parts of it are a little bit basic. You can still tell the Census Bureau is kind of wrapping its head around the whole online thing. I think they're asking whether people have separately, whether they have mobile phones and whether they have the internet. And odds are good if you've got a mobile phone, kind of comes with the internet, but they can be like that in Suitland. And here's another slide, next slide. Just if you want to know where people are living in boats, RVs, vans, etc. And this is not a bad proxy for poverty, by the way, with some exceptions. And that was also a very, very quick and simple map to generate. I can't recommend Social Explorer's mapping capabilities enough, whether you're looking at it at something nationwide or on a neighborhood, because a lot of times patterns that you might not pick up on looking at a big old spreadsheet are just literally leap out at you when you're looking at it from a map. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple of questions here. Is Social Explorer able to provide current data on multi-generational households by zip codes? Absolutely, piece of cake. Oh, current data. Okay, right now we've got, and thank you for bringing this up. Right now, the latest 5-year survey is 2015 to 19, which is good for a trend. The most zips are fewer than 65,000 people, so they're only available in the 5 years. Should be available in mid-March. This 5-year release was delayed from December to March because of COVID. The 1 year was completely scrapped. What kind of outputs can Social Explorer generate so we can act on the results? It really kind of depends on your field. I mean, if I were, I'll give you an example. My son works as a teacher's aide in a fairly poor rural school district in Vermont. And we used Social Explorer to figure out where to take meals to during the pandemic. A lot of kids were hungry, so they loaded up the school bus with school lunches, and we kind of did a circuit of southern Vermont in a bus with lots of meals. So there's a lot you can. That's just one example. I mean, there are almost infinite number of use cases. I think Andy went over some of the ones that we're really proud of. But chances are, if you're, if you are a nonprofit, you can use this information to your advantage. I saw some people from Habitat. Certainly, there is an absolute wealth of housing data out there in terms of owners, renters, poverty levels. There's median housing values, homes without plumbing or proper kitchen facilities, number of rooms, number of bedrooms. There's a lot there. So it all kind of depends on where you're coming from.
Hey, Andy.
Yeah.
Andy, are you there too? Hi, Frank.
Yeah, I'm here.
So there was a question from Joe. I work at a nonprofit that distributes goods to families. I think this is all incredibly interesting, but I'm having trouble envisioning how to make this data actionable for us. What sort of questions would you ask? What sort of changes could we think? And it looked like you had answered that, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, actually, I was working with a group in New York that actually distributed food, in the sense that they tried to distribute food where there was actually food shortages, where people needed food, like where they went hungry. And Social Explorer has a lot of, you can really target poverty levels. And as Frank was saying, you could find areas where the house, so you could I think that what we did was we combined the poverty level with what people were spending on housing, and whether or not that was, like whether or not the housing was quote unquote unaffordable, which is usually defined as more than 30% of your income. And so if you looked at areas where people have a very low income and they're still spending 50, 60, 70% of their income on housing, you're likely in an area where there's going to be a food shortage. And, it's quite amazing, actually. I remember I gave a presentation to lawyers that were working with people who were potentially going to be evicted in New York. And in Social Explorer, you can figure out in Social Explorer who is likely to be in a situation where they would be on a rent subsidy. And it turns out that a large fraction of those people are still spending a huge amount of money on housing. And so things like finding the homeless, which we did actually for a media project in Los Angeles, or finding where people are potentially going hungry, is doable. They don't have a direct question, do you get enough food? But based on people's like economic situation and what they're trying to do, you can certainly define areas where that would be likely.
Terrific. And then somebody asked, what licenses are available around sharing aggregated data for download? Any thoughts on that, Andy?
I thought that was your, well, I think it's shareable. Actually, Social Explorer is shareable. You can set it up. For example, I think you were distributing data on the county. If you set up a project, let's say, or a thing about a specific set of counties, and you set it up so that people could get at it, that's actually within the general license. So you can set it up so people could look at a set of counties. They couldn't really change the variables chosen, but you could scan around the maps and so forth. So there's a certain amount of distribution that's built in, actually. And you put them up you can set it up and put it up basically as a embed. If you have a website, you can put an embed on you can put it on embed on your site. If you're doing selected data by counting, I see Jennifer asked this further question, that would be under the general use, yes. In fact, some people have downloaded, we don't want them to download everything in one shot. I mean, that's because there's so much data. I mean, I think there's something like 42,000, what is it? It's 625,000 rows and something like 45,000 columns of data in the ACS. I mean, if you look at it like that, you know, that's the rows are a geography. But, you know, if you wanted to do something male targeting, someone asked that question, you could use the ZICTAs to characterize who's in what ZICTA. You know, so ZICTAs are really zip codes, they're residential zip codes. So basically every zip code is deliverable. It's not, there are some people who have the zip code that's not a ZICTA. Usually those are people who pick up their mail at a substation, or in New York, there's cases where one apartment building is a zip code. So they put, so there's the zip, I don't want to get into the zip code thing here, but there's a, I know a lot about zip codes. There's so-called embedded zip codes, point zip codes, and then there's real zip codes. And so ZICTAs basically are the quote unquote real zip codes. So as Frank said, they were set up not to be areas, but to be how you deliver mail. So
Frank, Frank, you want to show an example? I made you a host.
Yeah, let me make sure I can share my screen. Oh, joy. Okay. So let's say we want to look at SNAP recipients by zip codes for our area. This is what we call running with scissors, but it should be fairly easy. It gives us a map of the US. We're going to find, here we are, zip codes. Now we have a map of the US by zip code. We want a map of the US by zip code for people who receive SNAP benefits. I can't remember the table number, sue me, right? So I'm just going to look up a keyword. There we are, receipt of food stamps / SNAP. I know I want it for 2019 because that's the latest and a 5-year estimate, because it's a place over 65,000. And then I'm going to want, find the table here, yes. Household received food stamps in the past 12 months. This doesn't tell me everything. It's a little, forgive me, I'm not a graphic artist, but I need to separate this into something that's a little bit more understandable. So instead of the default category, I'm going to look at it by quantiles. That's a little bit better. And let's say,
You can zoom in. There you go.
yeah,
Nice.
let's say we want to look at my home area. Here is, so yeah, this is where my kid was working mostly in 05361, and you can also change it over time. So over the last 5 years, it's pretty impressive tool to have. You don't have to sit around with your calculator and jump from thing to thing. Unfortunately, when you change it to 5 years, it only gives you a county level view because census tracts have changed in the last. Or no, I don't guess they did change during that period. But that's
ZICTA's probably changed.
yeah, you're right. The ZICTA's
Zip codes change all the time, unfortunately. And I don't know how a census usually a geography. They usually, except for tracts, their own geographies, they usually adjust them every once a year, and it's usually December 31st that they use, because you know
And
places change.
Yeah, and here again, you can get into even more trouble with census tracts. So there's this is just a really really easy, wonderful tool, and you can zoom in anywhere in the country. You can change the category anytime, pretty much. Here's median home value by neighborhood. I'm trying to think some other, just a really simple one. Vacancy status. I live in a tourist haven, so I wind up grumping about this a lot. But here's the concentration of second homes. I'll see if I can't bring it out and make it just a little bit clearer. Anyway, there are a lot of second homes in some census tracts. Probably makes a little bit more sense to look at them by county. Yep. And you can I mean, there's just, again, this is things that you never know you needed that once you find out about, you cannot live without. So that's my quick pitch.
That's great. Well, thank you, Frank. I mean, that gave people, I was going to kind of walk through and just show people what it looks like and how easy it is to use, but that really fit that bill. That's great. And then what's also nice is we provide training for you as well. So we can provide you with really detailed training to help you with the product also. And we also provide a trial for you. So if you want to use it for a week or two, we provide a trial and you can play around with it that way. You know, there's two more questions that I think we could get to before we end, Andy. So why don't we start with, to what extent is data outdated? And is that an issue? Or 5-year estimates pulling from pre-pandemic data still actionable? How should we decide when to use that 5-year estimate? Maybe you could provide an answer to that?
Well, I think the thing is that, you know, it's one of these things like, there's no better source. This is the problem. I mean, in fact, I was very relieved to see that the Census Bureau did a lot of work with with the one they made experimental, which was the 2020 ACS, and they did a lot of work, and they're now standing behind it, and so it's coming out in March. Normally, it would have been out in December, the 5-year file, or no, yeah, at least by December, and so the thing is that, yeah, there's always this problem of 5 years. I mean, I guess as a long-term census type user, I see it as way better than the long form, which was eroding all decade. So basically, this was a replacement for the long form. There's efforts, I think, to increase the sample size. So if they increase the sample size, then you'd have better data at the 1 year, 1 year. And for certain things, you do have data at the 1 year level. In terms of this, the margins of error, the census is super conservative about how they've been presenting margins of error. And they actually have another whole thing. I don't know if we have it up, but there's they have a second shot at how they compute margins of error, and they use a more modern method. And it shows that the margins of error are much smaller than the ones that they've been publishing. I think the issue about being outdated is there. The truth is, though, it's used. I mean, this is used to set housing subsidies, by all the federal housing programs. It's used across all governmental agencies for all sorts of level setting. So if you're in a nonprofit and you have to show things that prove that certain things are this way or that way, the ACS is the best you've got. I mean, obviously it'd be better if it was instantaneous, but the big advantage of it is that it's a good sample. See, most of the it's a large sample and it's a good sample. A lot of the sort of stuff that's being collected these days by Facebook or these internet polls online, it's not, they might have a lot of cases that answer it, but the representation is terrible. So you don't know who answered it. I mean, actually, that's been one of the problems with COVID rates. You know, everybody has a positivity rate. They have a rate of new cases, but nobody knows who's taken a test. So you have no idea really what that means, you know, like, we know it went up and now it's going down, but you don't really know, you know, to get a real number is very, very difficult. It's certainly on cases. On deaths, it's a little different because there you have a death certificate. But I mean, all data have issues, and I would say that the ACS data have fewer issues than virtually any survey.
That's great. Thank you very much. I mean, that brings us towards the end. And thank you, Joe, for your comment just now about the presentation. I appreciate it. You know, in terms of cost, somebody asked cost for nonprofits, is that by organization or by user? It's sort of both. We sell it by the seat, and a one seat license for someone at your organization is $1,200 a year, which is a significant discount over what we charge other types of organizations to use it. So we have a really nice $100 a month price for nonprofits for one seat. And then it's $400 a seat after that. But if you want an organization to use it, we can negotiate a price for what that means. So we're happy to work with you on that. And
The
then
other thing that we've been working on, and the Ypsilanti and the Ypsilanti and the other, the Greenwich thing are examples of it. We're trying to figure out, you know, because we understand that, you know, so even though we tried to simplify the ACS as much as we can, I mean, the truth is jumping into the census data pool you can feel like you're jumping into the deep end and you don't know where to swim. So and plus it's very important, I think, in a lot of situations to actually integrate in your own data. And we're trying to figure out how to do this so we could do, you know, if you have patron data that has addresses associated with it, patrons or clients or donors, you know, it would not be very difficult for us to help you. I mean, to give you an example, just a side project that I do every year, I geocode every single CUNY student, which is about 250,000 students. I associate them with census blocks, and then what CUNY uses it for, and I'll tell you this. CUNY uses it then to associate with legislative districts of councilmen, state house, state senate, and Congress, and then they use it to lobby. So they go into an office and they can say, this is how many students you have. This is how many students who get, you know, various aid to go to college. And, you know, so those sorts of projects where you have data of your own that could be associated with various factors from the American Community Survey and be helpful to you, like we showed with Ypsilanti, that you know, we're open to trying to work out a way to do that because it's not that hard if you have data with addresses.
Thank you, Andy. And that brings us to the end. One other question was, you know, will we share the recording and the slides? And I will do that with everyone. You'll get that by Friday morning. So everyone will have access to the recording and everybody will have access to the slides. And I'll send you the links to those. So thank you all for joining today. It's really appreciated. It was a great meeting, really great questions, very helpful for us. So thank you all for joining, and I will follow up with everyone. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Jeff. And nice meeting all of you people, even virtually.
Bye now.